This time look at 5 classic European mopeds. Before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Now, the moped was originally intended to bridge that halfway between a bicycle and a motorcycle, hence 50cc engine and pedals, and essentially it filled in the gap that had been left behind by the autocycles of the early 1950s. Various companies in Japan and Europe produced these little bikes during the early and mid 70s. However, the UK government felt these bikes were getting just too sporty, so in 77 they changed the regulations, deleted the pedals which they felt were pretty much useless, and restricted the bikes down to 30 miles an hour. So while it's obvious that some of the bikes shown here don't actually have pedals, they are in fact, in the eyes of the UK law, mopeds. With that in mind, here are 5 classic European mopeds. The Hercules K50. While the name Hercules can seem strangely ironic for such a small motorcycle, the company itself dates all the way back to 1886, although it started producing motorcycles in 1904. In 1963, they were taken over by Sachs. Sachs being Europe's largest producer of two-stroke engines to the 1950s and 60s, so of course they employed these engines in the Hercules machines. In 1974, they became one of the first companies to produce a rotary Wankel engine motorcycle, but of course the machines were most commonly seen in the 1970s fitted with those Sachs two-stroke engines of 50cc and upwards. These were well-developed air-cooled two-stroke engines, with an auto-lube system too, so they were pretty reliable for the standards of the time and offered decent performance, although perhaps not up to the levels of their Italian counterparts, but they were probably more reliable in truth. The commercial failure of the rotary bike adversely affected the company's finances, although it would struggle on through the 80s, it would finally disappear in 1996. The Sachs G4. Fitchel & Sachs was founded in Germany in 1895. Like so many motorcycle companies, they started out in bicycle production, inventing the bicycle freewheel in 1889. In 1937 they presented the Saxonet Auto. This was a 60cc engine which could be installed in the hub of any bicycle, and was the start of motorcycle engine production. Specialising in small capacity two-strokes, they would go on to be the largest manufacturer in Europe in the post-war era. The G4 used a horizontally mounted two-stroke engine of 49cc's. And while of course Sachs did own Hercules, the engine in this machine was in fact quite different from those used on the Hercules models, as was the frame, which looks bizarrely bicycle-like I think. The machine was designed to be fairly modest, particularly when compared to the slightly more glamorous Hercules. But this did see it in good stead, and production would last into the mid-80s. Sachs as a company would survive into the millennium, although these days they're now producing Malaysian-built machines with Honda-based engines. But for many, these machines are no match for those cracking little two-strokes of the 70s and 80s. PUCH Grand Prix. PUCH was founded by Johann PUCH in Graz, Austria in 1889, initially as an importer of Humber vehicles from the United Kingdom. In 1890, however, he started to produce bicycle components. The factory began engine production in 1901, and in 1904 began production of their first motor cars. Legend has it that in 1923 Giovanni Marcellino was sent by the bank to wind up the PUCH factory in Graz. Instead, however, within a few weeks he had settled down to live there and had began working at the factory, designing a split single two-stroke motorcycle engine. This would go on during the 1931 German Grand Prix, when fitted with a supercharger, although of course the German firm DKW would make supercharged two-strokes more famous. PUCH's 1970s offerings would use a 50cc engine which is not quite mounted horizontally. This was a sturdy, well-designed little motor and was used in many of their products at that time. Performance was good, particularly mid-range at least for a moped, and the machine did offer an auto-lube system, so thankfully it didn't have to pre-mix the oil, unlike so many of its Italian competitors at the time. The PUCH had truly sporty looks, especially the JPS replica model. But in fact most of the running gear was based on the humble PUCH Maxi. This is no bad thing though, the Maxi was a reliable, solid machine, selling 1.8 million units during its production life. By the late 80s, the company was being squeezed out by cheaper competition from the Far East. In 1987, in a massive restructuring program, PUCH ended all production of two-wheeled vehicles at the Graz factory. Casal Phantom. I suppose Casal is unusual, and this is produced in Portugal, because it's not a country really well known for its motorcycle manufacturing industry. Equally unusually, the company is fairly young, being established in 1964, initially involved in the production of agricultural machinery, although it quickly got involved in the production of two-stroke motorcycles based on Zundaps. This isn't particularly surprising, because their chief engineer Robert Zipprich had formerly worked at Zundap before joining Casal. Initially they produced power units only, but by 1967 they were producing complete motorcycles, the first being a scooter, the S170 Carina, which was a copy of the Zundap R50. The scooter used a 50cc engine with a 4-speed gearbox. Shortly after this they rolled out a range of mopeds, with 2 speeds and 4-speed boxes. During the 1970s the company would compete successfully in motocross, and would use this as a springboard to advance sales outside of its home market. The Phantom was just one of a large range of machines that Casal offered during the 1970s. The little air-cooled 50 motor had a 5-speed gearbox, but in many ways was not quite as sophisticated as the Japanese opposition, but it was an excellent performer all the same. Like so many others here, they struggled in the face of cheaper foreign competition, with production ending in the year 2000. KTM Comet. Kronreef, Trunkenpolz and Matterhofen, thankfully for everybody, shortened to KTM. This company started in 1954 by producing an R125 tourist machine, followed by a scooter in 1955. And a quick note of apology to any German speakers out there for the god-awful pronunciation. Right from the early days, the company was earning its name really as an off-road producer, taking part in the International 6-Day Trials in 1956 and securing a gold medal. The company would continue to develop and grow. By 1971, it was offering 42 different models in its range, although of course mostly off-road machines. But there were some on-road mopeds too, of course. Like many machines of the period, the KTM used a 47cc single-cylinder Sachs 2-stroke engine, in the case of the KTM fitted with a 4-speed gearbox, or a 5-speeder in the case of the MSS 50. These engines were good, solid and reliable, and could punch the machine to just over 50 miles an hour. Of course, KTM of this period is much smaller than it is today, so production volumes are quite low. Nevertheless, some machines were imported into the UK. Very few survive today, of course, because they were hacked through British winters of salty roads. But there are still a few out there, if you can find one. Hope you enjoyed that collection of 5 super 70s mopeds. What other quirky collections of bikes would you like to hear about? Drop us a line below and let us know what you think. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, thank you very much for watching.